Hey everyone, I'm Sinai, your 4-star guy, and 1.5 is right around the corner, but I wanted to finish out my guide on Xiangling first. In my last video, I talked about team comps that I think Xiangling can work well in as a main damage dealer and as a support. I highly recommend you check it out either now or after this video so you know what teams these builds are made for. This video I'll talk about how to kit her out to let her do some major work in those teams. In particular, I will mostly be talking about how to build her as a superconduct damage dealer, a Vaporize damage dealer, as well as talking a little about her as a support. So, as a superconduct damage dealer, most of Xiangling's damage comes from her normal attacks. As for the artifact sets you want to put on her, as of now the 2-piece Bloodstained Chivalry set is best when used with the 2-piece Gladiator set. The 25% physical damage bonus increases the amount of damage that her normal and charge attacks do. Physical damage also increases the amount of damage that extra hits do from weapons like the Halberd and especially the Crescent Pike. A 4-piece Gladiator set is also pretty good too, giving us 18% attack as well as a 35% normal attack damage bonus. You may be wondering why using 2-piece Bloodstain is better than a 4-piece Gladiator when the Gladiator set gives us a higher normal attack bonus. But I found out that using a charge attack instead of the last hit of the normal attack combo is stronger with the Bloodstained Chivalry bonus rather than doing the same or just the regular normal attack combo with the Gladiator set. Because using a charge attack makes our normal attacks just that much stronger, the 4-piece Retracing Bolide has the potential to be even stronger than the other two artifact sets by a little bit, since despite not having an attack percent buff, it gives us 40% to both our normal and charge attack damage. The only thing is that to use it, Xiangling will need a shield, and it might not always be worth it to pry in a shield character on every team you plan on using her with. If you're using the Crescent Pike, the Bloodstained Chivalry set will still be better than the Retracing Bolide set because it doesn't help with the extra hits of damage, while the physical damage does. At the moment, those are the 3 best choices for artifacts, although there is one that is coming out very soon in 1.5 that I think will be the best choice for her by far. If my interpretation of the effects description is right, the Pale Flame set will give us 18% attack as well as 50% physical damage bonus. The 2-piece effect gives us 25% physical damage, and the 4-piece effect activates when our elemental skill hits an enemy. It gives us 9% attack that can stack 2 times, and when we get the second stack, our 2-piece effect is doubled. Because Xiangling's Goba has multiple hits when using it, and the duration of the effect makes it such that we should have the max buff constantly when we use Goba on cooldown. With the max buffs all of the time, it's like having 2-piece Bloodstained and 2-piece Gladiator set with double the Bloodstain bonus. The Heart of Depth set is funny to me since it is built for Hydro characters, but the 4-piece effect can help anyone, which buffs your normal and charge attack damage by 30% when you use your skill for 15 seconds. It's like the Retracing Bolide, but it has an easier condition to activate that Xiangling can keep going, but it is also weaker. The Lava Walker set can be okay. It can give you a 35% overall damage bonus on Pyro affected enemies, but I think that it is more trouble than it's worth to try to use Xiangling's skill and ultimate to apply the Pyro for its effect, but also manage to superconduct all your enemies. I honestly wouldn't recommend building the Crimson Witch set if you mostly plan on using Xiangling as a superconduct damage dealer, since you won't really be doing reactions with her, and investing in her physical damage is much more powerful than giving her pyro damage bonus. The 2-piece Noblesse Oblige set gives us more damage on her ultimate, but much like the Crimson Witch set, physical damage is better than focusing on her pyro damage. I wouldn't recommend using it as a 4-piece set since we only get the attack percent buff when we use our ultimate, but Xiangling's ultimate has a long cooldown and a high energy cost, so we won't have it up very much. As for 4-star options, the Berserker set is the only one that I can think is really good on her. If you manage to keep her below 70% HP most of the time, she'll get a ton of crit rate that we can use to boost our overall damage by a lot. But since 4-star artifacts are a considerable amount weaker than 5-stars in general, I think that you should look for a good 5-star artifact set when you can. The Martial Artist set may seem strong, with the 2-piece set giving us 15% normal and charge attack damage, and the 4-piece set gives us an extra 25% when we use our elemental skill for 8 seconds. But since Xiangling has a pretty long cooldown on her skill, the 4-piece effect won't be as powerful. Using it as a 2-piece could also be a pretty good option. The 2-piece Braveheart set gives us 18% attack, and the 4-piece gives us a 30% overall damage bonus against enemies above 50%, so we only pretty much get the buff like half the time. This is alright as a 2 or 4-piece set. For the main stats of your artifacts, you're going to want attack percent for your timepiece, physical damage for your goblet, and crit rate or crit damage for your circlet, depending on whichever one you could use more of. For the subsets, you're going to want crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, and energy recharge. Now onto the weapons. The 2 that I have found to be the best are the Staff of Homa and the Primordial Jadewing Spear. The Staff of Homa has a great base attack and a powerful crit damage subset, and the Primordial Spear has an even better base attack and a useful crit rate subset. The Staff of Homa gives you some HP percent and an attack boost scaled off of your max HP. Your attack boost increases when your HP is less than 50%, which is always possible, but may be a little tricky to keep up all the time. The Primordial Spear gives you a small attack percent buff whenever you land a hit on an enemy for up to 7 stacks. When you get 7 stacks of the buff, you get an overall damage boost. They are both similarly amazing, and whichever one you think is better depends on which crit set you could use more of, whether you have a lot of HP, and if you think you can keep Xiangling at low HP all of the time, or if you just like how consistent the primordial buff is. The Vortex Vanquisher is strong with a 5-star base attack, an attack percent subset, and small attack percent buffs much like the primordial spear for up to 5 stacks. The attack percent buffs get twice as strong when you have a shield over you. This is a good choice if you always use a shield, but it is still not quite as good as the higher two even with a shield. Now for everyone's favorite, the Crescent Pike. And by the way, I only especially mention this weapon often in other videos because of its unique traits that make it skill better due to other factors that are pretty unusual. Like how you get more hits of extra damage depending on how many hits a character's normal attack combo has, and the fact that the extra hits scale off of physical damage and not normal or charge attack damage. I don't mention it all of the time because I think that it is the absolute best weapon on her or anything, but it is really good. Luckily, Xiangling has a ton of hits in her normal attack combo, so we get a lot of extra hits of damage using it. But it also has a great base attack for a 4-star weapon and has a useful physical damage subset. This weapon is great on her, but it is not as strong as the Vortex Vanquisher, although it is stronger than it without a shield. The Skyward Spine is the next highest damaging weapon. It has an amazing base attack, and its effect gives us a little bit of crit rate and normal attack speed buff. We also have a chance to get a small hit of extra damage every 2 seconds. If you think that you want the energy recharge subset, you can consider this weapon better than the other weapons in this tier, especially since it still deals a good amount of damage. The Deathmatch has a pretty low base attack, but has a great crit rate subset. Its effect is also good, increasing our attack and defense when there are 2 or more enemies nearby, and just increasing our attack by a larger amount when there's only 1. This effect is pretty consistent since even against multiple enemies, the attack percent buff is nice, and even gets better against 1. The Lithic Spear has a high base attack for a 4-star weapon, an attack percent subset, and the effect gives us some attack percent and crit rate for every leeway character we have on the team. For my calculations, I just use 2 leeway characters since I think it is reasonable, and I don't think forcing teammates to be on our team is worth the buffs from this weapon, but it could be the best in this tier if you do have 4 leeway teammates. Xiangling being from leeway herself does help with this. The Black Clef Pole has an average base attack for a 4-star and a solid crit damage subset. The effect gives us some extra attack percent whenever we kill an enemy for up to 3 buff stacks. This effect can be powerful in the right situations, but it can also be not helpful at all when we are only facing one boss-like enemy. The Dragon Spine Spear has a low base attack but has a physical damage subset. It also deals an extra hit of damage once every 10 seconds, which deals more damage against enemies affected by cryo. The physical damage is great and everything, but keeping the enemies affected by cryo is not going to be very practical with Xiangling as your main damage dealer, meaning that the extra hit is going to be very weak. This weapon is definitely weaker than the other weapons in this tier, but it does inch out the tier below. The White Tussle is a 3-star that I think is very exciting. It has a crit rate subset and a pretty large normal attack damage bonus from its effect. It would be great if it weren't for the low stats of a 3-star, but I think it is still pretty awesome. The Royal Spear is kind of whatever. It has an attack percent subset and an effect that increases your crit rate for as long as you don't get a crit hit. It might be lower than it deserves, but I feel okay not looking into it too much since there are definitely better options, and you would have to spend a pretty large amount of Star Glitter in Paimon Shop to get it, so I wouldn't recommend it. The Halberd is another solid 3-star with a base attack close to some 4-stars, an attack percent subset, and a pretty large extra hit of damage every 10 seconds. The Favonius Lance is a 4-star with a high base attack and an energy recharge subset. Despite having an energy recharge subset, the high base attack makes up for it pretty well. The effect also gives us extra energy particles when we land crit hits, and with a good enough crit rate, this can be totally reliable. The Prototype Star Glitter is another weapon with an energy recharge subset. Its effect gives us some normal and charge attack damage bonus when we use our skill, but unluckily because it doesn't have a particularly high base attack, has an energy recharge subset instead of an offensive one, as well as the fact that we can't stack the effects buffs since Xiangling's skill's cooldown is too long for the effect's duration, it turns out to be pretty weak in general. The Favonius Lance may even give us just as much energy despite having a lower energy recharge subset because it generates particles from its effect. The Dragon's Bane may seem powerful for Xiangling since it gives us extra overall damage against Pyro or Hydro affected enemies, but because the base attack is so low and the subset does not help us at all, it is actually pretty weak. We may be able to get the extra damage from its effect pretty often by hitting enemies with our Pyro moves, but the only reactions we're going to use on a physical team are Superconduct and Overloaded. She doesn't do anything in Superconduct, and Overloaded has a couple of problems. Xiangling typically applies more Pyro than Electro characters can apply Electro, so the enemies are usually affected by Pyro and the Electro characters would trigger the reaction, meaning that Xiangling's Elemental Mastery is not used. And even if Xiangling does trigger the reaction, the enemy would have to be affected by Electro, and we won't get the damage bonus from the weapon's effect. Anyway, the Black Tassel is awesome. It's totally like low B tier if every enemy in the game was a slime. But unfortunately, not every enemy in the game is a slime, so this weapon actually really sucks in most situations. But yeah, low base attack even for 3-star standards and an HP subset, so yeah. In my team comp guide, which by the way, remember to watch it, I introduced the idea that Xiangling can be great as a Vaporize damage dealer. If you want to build Xiangling to be good as a Vaporize damage dealer, we're going to want to invest a little more into her Pyro damage, since her skill and ultimate are going to be more powerful in general, since nearly all of her damage from those attacks are going to be amplified by Vaporize. Because of this, the full Crimson Witch of Flame set is actually very powerful, giving us Pyro damage bonus and an increased damage from Vaporize. Slightly unfortunate, but because Xiangling's cooldown on her skill is long, we are not going to get multiple stacks of the 4-piece effect, which gives us more Pyro damage bonus. At most, we can get 1 buff for her ultimate if we use her skill before it. As a side note, Xiangling's Pyro damage gets even stronger as you get higher constellations of her. Her first constellation decreases the enemy's Pyro resistance by 15%, her third constellation increases her ultimate's level, her fourth constellation increases her ultimate's duration, meaning that we get more hits of Pyro damage using it, her fifth constellation increases her skills level, and her sixth constellation gives us a 15% Pyro damage bonus during her ultimate. We can use our 6th constellation for her skill if we use it after her ult, but we won't get the extra Pyro damage bonus from the Crimson Witch 4-piece effect for her ult. The point is, with higher constellation levels, consider starting to invest less in her normal attacks and more into her Pyro damage for Vaporize. The Pale Flame set will still be pretty good, and it might make it easier if you just want to use one build for Xiangling to be both a physical and Vaporize damage dealer. Using a 2-piece Noblesse Oblige with a 2-piece Crimson Witch is a pretty good next choice for extra Pyro damage and ultimate damage bonus. The other sets that were good for her normal and charge attack damage are still pretty decent, such as the 2-piece Blessing 2-piece Gladiator, 4-piece Gladiator, 4-piece for Chasing Bolide, and the 4-piece Heart of Depth set. The Berserker set will still be a good 4-star alternative. The Braveheart and Martial Artist set will be okay, but a little less so on the Martial Artist set since we are going to be focusing more on her skill and ultimate instead of her normal and charge attack. We are not going to want to use the Lava Walker set for its effect, since in order to use Vaporize with Xiangling, we are going to be hitting Hydro affected enemies, so we won't get any set bonuses. For the main stats of her artifacts, we are going to want attack percent for the timepiece. I found that attack percent for the timepiece will be stronger overall than an Elemental Mastery one, even though we are using Vaporize with her a lot. A Pyro damage goblet will also be strong. A physical damage or an attack percent one is okay, especially at low constellations, but as you get more copies of her, I would recommend you look for a good Pyro damage goblet if you plan on using her as a Vaporize damage dealer often. And lastly, a crit rate or crit damage circlet is the best. For her subsets, you're going to want crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, energy recharge, and elemental mastery. For the weapons, the Staff of Homa and the Primordial Jade Wing Spear are still going to be the strongest weapons for their great base attacks, crit damage and crit rate subsets, and their solid attack buffs from their effects. The Vortex Vanquisher is strong and is even stronger with a shield. The Scar Spine deals a solid amount of damage, and the Energy Recharge subset is extra useful since we rely more on her ultimate for damage. The Deathmatch has a sweet crit rate subset and reliable and good attack percent buffs. The Lithic Spear is good and becomes pretty great when you have 4 leeway teammates. The Black Cliff Pole has a great crit damage subset and good attack percent buffs if you can kill multiple enemies for it. The Dragon's Bane is much more useful as a Vaporize weapon since we get extra damage against Hydro affected enemies, and the Elemental Mastery subset will increase our Vaporize damage. The Crescent Pike still gets us a lot of damage from our normal attacks. By the way, physical damage from artifacts is better if you're using the Crescent Pike than with other weapons, since a decent amount of damage comes from extra hits along with your normal attacks. Pyro damage will still eventually be better though. The Royal Spear is okay and pretty strong. The Favonius Lance is good with a solid base attack and energy recharge. The White Tassel is good for a 3-star with its crit rate subset and normal attack damage bonus. The Dragon Spine Spear is not very good since it has a low base attack for a 4-star, we only get the weak hit of its effect, and the physical damage subset is not useful. The Halberd is a pretty strong 3-star. The Prototype Star Glitter is still pretty weak, although you may like the energy recharge. And the Black Tassel really sucks. If you want to use Xiangling as a support, there are a few artifact sets you may want to consider. If you want to use her to give buffs for the rest of the team, you could use the Exile set to give yourself some energy recharge for your ultimate, and to give the rest of the team some energy when you use it. If you are looking for energy recharge, I think that it is more worthwhile to just use 5-star artifacts, since you could probably just get the same amount of energy recharge from 5-star artifacts main stats and greater amount of substats. You could also use the Noblesse Oblige 4-piece set, but along with the Exile set, because her ultimate has such a high energy cost and has a pretty long cooldown, I don't think she is a great character to try to buff the team with these sets. I don't think that the Instructor set is really good for Xiangling since she applies with Pyro a lot, so she usually applies the element rather than triggering reactions. So I don't think that she will use the Elemental Mastery bonus and buff the team's Elemental Mastery unless you have a plan for it. There is another artifact set that is coming out that I think Xiangling could use as a support. The tenacity of the Millilith set gives us 20% HP for its 2-piece effect and increases the party's attack by 20% when our skill hits an enemy for 3 seconds. Because it lasts for only 3 seconds, it is best for characters like Xiangling to use where her skill hits enemies multiple times to keep the buffs going. The only thing is that the other bonuses from the set don't really help her out much, and while her skill is on cooldown, the attack percent buff will have some downtime. If you don't think that any supportive set is particularly worthwhile on her, which is pretty understandable, you could just use artifact sets that will increase her skill and ultimates damage, since her support usually comes in the form of applying Pyro from off-field. For damage on those talents, we could use the 2-piece sets of the Noblesse Oblige, Crimson Witch, and Gladiator artifact sets. For the weapons you could use for her as a support, it would pretty much be the same as the Vaporize weapon tier list, except normal and physical damage will be useless, and energy overcharge will be much better with weapons like the Scour Spine, Favonius Lance, and the prototype Star Glitter. I still think that the Favonius Lance is better than the prototype Star Glitter, especially since the Star Glitter's effects buffs are normal and charge attack damage, which is useless. Now onto which talents you should level up. As a damage dealer, leveling up her normal attack is the strongest. Obviously, if you're just using her as a support, you don't have to focus on her normal attack too much, if at all. Her ultimate is her next strongest talent and is useful whether or not she is a support or damage dealer. Her skill is the last thing I will level up to a high level. I'd usually talk about her constellations here, but I kind of already mentioned most of them when I talked about how they affect her pyro damage. Her first constellation is great for your pyro damage and can even help you support another pyro damage dealer if you want. Her second constellation is pretty ignorable. We would still just use her charge attack instead of her last hit of her normal attack anyway. Her third constellation is a nice boost for her ultimate, and the fourth constellation is great and where I would personally stop looking for more constellations. That helps her out a lot as a support and damage dealer. As a support, she can apply more pyro for reactions to happen with each ultimate, and it lowers the stress of having to recharge her ultimate since it has more uptime in the first place. It also deals a good amount more damage over time, especially with the previous constellation's 3 extra levels. Her fifth constellation is okay since I don't think that leveling up her skill is super important, and her sixth constellation is also just okay. I only say it's okay because we can't get the pyro damage buff for her ultimate since we have to use it to activate it. Only her skill can benefit from it, but then her ultimate is weaker if you are using the Crimson Witch set since using your skill increases your pyro damage with it too. If we got pyro damage for her skill and ultimate, I would think this is pretty good. Admittedly, she is not even that great of a support for other pyro characters since why would pyro damage dealers need Xiangling to apply pyro for them anyway? So yeah, that was what artifacts and weapons I think Xiangling is good with. I hope this guide gave you a better idea of what you want to do with her. In my opinion, she is one of the strongest 4-stars in the game since she can be a great pyro or physical damage dealer and is one of the only pyro supports capable of doing what she can do. Anyway, thank you for watching the whole video if you did. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed what I had to say. I do Genshin Impact tips, team comps, character builds, and the occasional mess around video. Thank you for checking out my channel, and see you when 1.5 rolls out.